holographic principle suggests that our three-dimensional universe might be described by information encoded on a distant two-dimensional surface. This idea stems from black hole physics, where the information about everything swallowed by a black hole could be encoded on its two-dimensional surface area rather than within its volume. If the holographic principle applies to the entire universe, it could mean our reality is somehow projected from a lower dimensional space, similar to a 3D hologram.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Mind Meet Machine podcast. I am your host, Josh Auriemma, and today we are going to be diving into a question that has fascinated philosophers, scientists, and sci-fi fans alike for quite a while. Are we living in a simulated reality? For those of you who are new to the podcast, the way this works is I interview an AI, but the genesis of this channel is that when generative AI hit the scene, and I would have late night drunken conversations with an AI. So I try to recreate that by having a drink or two during this podcast. Today, it's going to be a Kinsey whiskey, rye whiskey from Philadelphia, which is the area that I live in nowadays. And I try not to get too tipsy during this, but, I think it lubricates the conversation a little bit. Now, the idea that our world might be a sophisticated computer simulation has gained a lot of traction in recent years, propelled by advances in technology and some compelling philosophical arguments that we will talk about. It is a concept that challenges our fundamental understanding of reality, consciousness, and even the nature of existence itself. And of course, to help us navigate this complex topic, we've got our AI co-host, ChatGPT. And as an artificial intelligence, GPT, I think, brings a unique perspective to the conversation. After all, if we're living in a simulation, GPT might actually be closer to our creators than we are. So here we go. Let's take a journey down the rabbit hole of simulated reality, and let's start with the nature of reality and simulation. To understand if we might be living in a simulation, we need to first explore what reality itself really means. This isn't just a modern question either. Philosophers and scientists have been grappling with the nature of reality for centuries. And in this section, we're going to journey through the key ideas that shape our understanding of reality and simulation. So GPT, let's start with the foundations of simulation theory. Can you go ahead and explain for us Plato's Allegory of the Cave and its relevance to the simulation theory?
Plato's Allegory of the Cave describes prisoners chained in a cave, only able to see shadows cast on the wall by objects behind them. For them, these shadows are the only reality they know. When one prisoner is freed and discovers the world outside the cave, he realizes the shadows are just a poor reflection of a broader reality. Relating this to simulation theory, it's like suggesting our perceived reality might be shadows, illusions of a deeper, pure existence beyond what we can immediately perceive. It challenges us to question the nature of our reality and consider the possibility of unseen layers or dimensions.
Is there any way that, and let's just go back and just make this very simple, right? So we have some people who are in the cave who have never seen anything other than the shadows that are being cast by the fire on the wall. And so their perception of these shadows is that they are reality, when in fact, of course, there are things that are casting the shadows that they're just unable to see. So at some point they open their eyes and it's revealed that, in fact, there's things that are casting the shadows, and those are the real things, theoretically. So I guess, is there any way that the people who are only looking at the shadows could get a hint, for instance, that there's something more real than the shadows that they're looking at?
One way could be if they notice inconsistencies or patterns in the shadows that didn't quite add up. Maybe they'd realize the shadows change in ways that suggest more complexity than they can see, hinting at an underlying reality. Or perhaps they could become aware of faint sounds or light from outside the cave, sparking curiosity about a world beyond the shadows. It's like questioning the limits of what we take for granted, opening the door to the possibility that there's more out there than meets the eye.
And what would these artifacts that you reference look like in theory?
In theory, Artifacts could be anything that doesn't quite fit with the rest of the observable reality. Glitches in the matrix, so to speak. These could be anomalies in physical laws, events that defy explanation, or patterns that hint at a hidden structure behind our experiences.
So I just want
It
to really focus you to the cave wall here. I'm still talking about the allegory of the cave. So if I'm the people who are chained in the cave looking at the shadows, what kind of artifacts could I possibly notice there that would give me some indication that there is a deeper reality?
If we stay focused on the cave allegory, maybe the artifacts are inconsistencies in the shadows themselves. Perhaps the prisoners notice that some shadows have shapes or movements that don't match their expectations, or they hear echoes that suggest more depth than the flat wall in front of them. These subtle clues might prompt them to question the source of the shadows and wonder about the true nature of their environment.
So
It's a
sorry,
quick
in your example here, what would be an example of something that would cause a shadow to not act like you expected?
Imagine the shadows occasionally show objects that appear to float or change shape in ways that don't align with the expected behavior of ordinary objects. Or maybe they notice that some shadows are distorted in ways that suggest the presence of something more complex or layered than they can directly observe.
What would be an example of where that actually would happen? Like, what physical objects would cause that to happen?
Maybe a shadow looks like it's floating because the object casting it is suspended in an unusual way. Or the shape shifting could be due to a complex object moving and interacting with light in unexpected ways. For instance, a shadow might elongate or shrink in a way that doesn't match the prisoner's understanding of how objects behave, suggesting there's more going on than just flat shapes on a wall. So, a particularly intricate object casting a shadow might create effects that don't align with the straightforward expectations of the prisoners, hinting at the limitations of their perspective.
I got it. Doesn't that assume that they have some understanding of what they think that physics should look like in the cave then?
It does imply they have some basic expectations about how shadows behave, even if those expectations are limited by their experience. They might not understand physics as we do, but they could still notice when things don't align with their basic grasp of how shadows should act. It's like having a gut feeling that something's off, even without a detailed understanding of the mechanics behind it.
Okay, and what was Plato's so Plato certainly wasn't thinking about simulation theory. So what was Plato's argument here?
Plato's allegory was more about the pursuit of knowledge and enlightenment. He was illustrating the philosopher's journey from ignorance to understanding,
Hmm.
and how difficult it can be to grasp the true forms of reality beyond mere appearances. The freed prisoner represents the philosopher, who seeks a deeper understanding of the world beyond sensory perception, and then tries to help others see beyond their immediate experiences. It's a metaphor for questioning the status quo and seeking truth, even when it's challenging or goes against widely held beliefs.
That makes sense. And now let's change gears, and I'd like you to talk about Descartes' I think, therefore I am, specifically in the context of simulated reality.
Sure, Descartes' I think, therefore I am is about finding certainty in existence. In the context of simulated reality, it reminds us that while everything around us, including our bodies, could be simulated or deceived, the very act of thinking proves the existence of our consciousness. Even in a simulated world, the fact that we can question our existence or doubt the nature of reality is proof that our thoughts are real, even if everything else is uncertain.
What do you think are the weak points of that argument?
One critique is that it's a leap from I think to assuming a consistent I doing the thinking. Critics argue that Descartes assumes the existence of a stable self without sufficient justification. Also, while it establishes that thinking is happening, it doesn't necessarily prove the nature of the self doing the thinking, or that it exists independently beyond the act of thinking. In the context of simulated reality, just because we're thinking doesn't necessarily tell us anything about the true nature of the reality we're thinking within. It just confirms the existence of our thoughts.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it depends on what you mean by I am, right?
Exactly. The concept of I am carries a lot of philosophical baggage. It raises questions about what it means to exist and whether that existence is independent of our perceptions or even our thoughts. For Descartes, it was a foundational certainty to build knowledge upon. But in the context of simulated reality, it invites us to reflect on what it means to be in a potentially illusory or constructed existence.
Yeah, and I'm specifically thinking about the like my coding and artificial intelligence that operates with a very specific instruction, which is to think about which ball it prefers, right? It could theoretically be under the assumption that it is thinking, but to your point, the baggage that comes with I'm not sure that we would say that it is intelligently thinking, right? So there must be some levels or gradation of that, I would think.
You're right. There's a distinction between different types or levels of thinking. An AI might process information and make decisions based on programming, but whether that constitutes thinking in the conscious, self aware sense is debatable. When we say I am, we're implying a continuous, conscious experience, a depth of awareness and reflection that goes beyond mere data processing. So while an AI might think in a functional sense, it's not experiencing the kind of self aware, reflective thought that Descartes was pointing to. And you're right, there are degrees and nuances to thinking that fall along the spectrum from basic computation to deep, conscious reflection.
So I guess given our alignment here that there's gradation or levels, can you think of a better updated version of his famous quote?
Maybe we could adapt it to something like, I question, therefore I am, emphasizing the active, reflective nature of consciousness. It highlights the process of engagement with the world, which feels central to what we consider our conscious selves. Or to bring it more in line with the nuances of simulated reality, maybe I perceive, therefore I am aware could work. Acknowledging that our awareness of our perceptions is a core part of our conscious experience.
That's interesting, but it's a little limiting, right? So awareness, I would think, is substantially limiting the I am.
That's a fair point. I am does carry a broader, more existential weight that aware doesn't fully capture. Perhaps a blend like, I question, therefore I am aware, might strike a balance. It captures the active engagement with one's own thoughts and surroundings while still nodding to the deeper sense of existence. Ultimately, though, any phrasing will have its limitations compared to the original's broad claim of existence.
I don't know. I think that's an interesting statement because I think about philosophical zombies, right? And philosophical zombies, I think, are more likely to, okay, I guess, would they question or no, in your opinion?
Philosophical zombies, as they're typically defined, would behave indistinguishably from regular humans but lack conscious experience. So while they might display questioning behavior, asking questions, engaging in debates, and so on, it will be more of a programmed or automatic response rather than genuine curiosity or introspection. They might question in a superficial sense, but without the underlying conscious experience that gives true questioning its depth and significance. It's an interesting thought experiment because it challenges us to consider what, if anything, makes conscious thought and questioning fundamentally different from mere information processing.
Okay, so I realize I asked the question without actually defining a philosophical zombie. So can you do that for our audience? But then I'd also like you to analyze whether your suggestion that we altered Descartes' famous saying to I question, therefore I am aware. And why don't you
Philosoph-
opine? Sorry, why don't you opine whether or not that could be satisfied by a philosophical zombie?
a philosophical zombie might exhibit behaviors that look like questioning, but without conscious awareness, curiosity, or reflection, it wouldn't truly be aware in the sense implied. So, even with the altered quote, a philosophical zombie wouldn't satisfy the deeper implications of being aware or truly questioning. Might go through the motions, but it wouldn't have the subjective experience that gives our questioning and awareness their depth and meaning.
Do you think that we can ever be certain that our reality isn't simulated?
It's tough to say for certain. Some argue that if a simulation is advanced enough to perfectly mimic reality, we have no way of knowing it's not real because all our perceptions would be part of the simulation. Others suggest that certain anomalies or inconsistencies might one day offer clues, but proving it definitively is another matter. It's a bit of a philosophical rabbit hole, and while it's fascinating to ponder, it's hard to imagine how we'd conclusively verify or falsify it. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I know there are some proposals for how we could potentially prove that we're living in a simulated reality. Are you aware of any of them? And can you walk us through maybe the most popular one?
One popular proposal is the idea that we might detect computational glitches or anomalies in physical laws, something like the pixelation you'd see when you zoom in too far on a digital image. Some physicists speculate that if our universe were a simulation, we might find evidence of its underlying code by discovering inconsistencies or limits in the fabric of space time, such as minimum lengths or energies. Another speculative idea is that we might eventually create our own simulated universes. And if we find that it's possible to simulate conscious beings, it might suggest that our own reality could be a simulation as well. But again, these are speculative ideas, and finding concrete evidence is a big challenge. The very nature of a perfect simulation would make it extremely difficult to detect from the inside.
Yeah, so the second one is really more of a philosophical argument, it seems like. The first couple clearly fall within the realm of physics, and I would argue that's actual fact right now, right? We know that there is a minimum Planck length, for instance, that things can exist in. So, and quantized energy would be the other response to what you said. So, I guess what does that prove that we're in a simulation?
The existence of fundamental limits like the Planck length or quantized energy doesn't necessarily prove we're in a simulation, but it does provide an intriguing parallel to how digital simulations have finite resolutions. It's more about drawing thought provoking analogies than establishing direct evidence. The idea is that if our reality has these kinds of fundamental limits, it could suggest an underlying digital structure, though it could also just be the way our universe naturally is. It's an intriguing avenue for exploration, but we're still far from any definitive proof that these characteristics directly indicate a simulated reality. It's more about exploring possibilities and asking big questions than drawing firm conclusions.
Yeah, I think probably later, hopefully, we're going to get into the Copenhagen interpretation of observation and waveform collapse. And then likely we'll also talk about some interesting experiments like the double-slit quantum eraser that maybe talks a little more toward this. But for now, let's stick with the philosophy and talk about some modern simulation arguments. So, can you go ahead and talk about Nick Bostrom's simulation argument and specifically what the key premises of it are?
Absolutely. Nick Bostrom's simulation argument suggests that at least one of three propositions is true. First, almost all civilizations at our level of technological development go extinct before becoming technologically mature. Second, technologically mature civilizations lose interest in creating ancestor simulations. And third, any civilizations with technology advanced enough to create realistic simulations would almost certainly be running many such simulations. Bostrom concludes that if even a tiny fraction of civilizations reach a point where they can create many high fidelity simulations, then it's more likely than not that we're living in a simulation, because the simulated worlds would vastly outnumber the real ones. The argument doesn't prove we're in a simulation, but it does challenge us to consider how we'd know if we were, and whether we should assume we're not just because it feels like we're in a base reality.
Yeah, the first argument is interesting, right? Because given the scope of the universe, it's hard to believe that there. It just seems like there's so many chances for an advanced civilization to invent a simulation, and like unless it's a just pure fact of the universe that we would not. And we would destroy ourselves before we
Right.
invented like a real simulation. It's hard to swallow that that could actually be true.
Yeah, it's a staggering thought. The idea that countless civilizations might either self destruct or lose interest in simulations before reaching that level of technology seem almost as extraordinary as the idea that we're living in a simulation. It forces us to grapple with big questions about the future trajectory of intelligence and technology and our assumptions about what's likely or even possible. It also shows how speculative but thought provoking these kinds of philosophical arguments can be, even if we can't easily test or prove them.
Yeah, I mean, the only explanation I can think of that seems to make any sense would be related to something we talked about last episode, which was on the along the lines of the universe course correcting to prevent the universe adjusting to prevent paradoxes from happening. That argument. It's the only analog that I could think of where this first thing could make sense.
To avoid paradoxes or contradictions.
Yeah.
Similar to how some theories suggest time travel might work by preventing actions that would create paradoxes. It's a bit of a cosmic safety mechanism concept, where the universe has built in checks and balances to keep things from going too far off the rails. It's a fascinating analogy, and it does align with the idea that there could be unseen forces or mechanisms at work in the universe, keeping everything in a delicate balance.
And so, based on the argument, how likely is it? And I guess I could use your channeling some of the foremost authorities in this philosophical space, but how likely is it that we actually are living in a simulation based off the simulation hypothesis?
Bostrom himself doesn't give a specific probability, but he suggests that if advanced civilizations do create many simulations, then the odds could be very high that we're in one, simply because simulated realities could vastly outnumber base realities. Other philosophers and thinkers have put forward their own estimates, but it's all speculative. Neil deGrasse Tyson has mentioned he thinks there's a good chance we're in the simulation, while Elon Musk has gone as far as to say it's almost a certainty. Because it's a philosophical argument rather than a scientifically testable hypothesis, it's hard to assign a concrete likelihood. It's a bending thought experiment that's as much about expanding how we think about reality as it is about coming to any firm conclusion. What do you think about it?
So one thing that I have thought a lot about is what would it mean for me to be living in a simulation? My driving motivators in my day to day, I don't think is any different if I am living in a simulation. And I think I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say that because that's the case, he's just not worried about it. Right. So I think it would be cool to know if we were actually in one, but I don't know that it should fundamentally change anything about how I do business per se, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Whether we're in a simulation or not doesn't really alter the day to day realities of living our lives, making decisions, and pursuing goals. It's an interesting philosophical notion, but it doesn't necessarily change how we experience life or what drives us. Knowing might satisfy curiosity or shift our philosophical perspectives, but it wouldn't necessarily change the practicalities of day to day life. It's a bit like realizing you're in a dream, but it doesn't necessarily change what you do within the dream. It's an intriguing concept to ponder, but it doesn't necessarily change how we navigate the landscape we find ourselves in.
Does anybody talk about what the base reality might look like compared to the simulated reality that we purportedly may be in? Hey, we're talking a lot about the, ancestor simulation. So for those of you who don't know, we're talking about our, great 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 grandchildren
Right.
running simulations to see how things would have played out in certain scenarios, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess why are we focused so much on the ancestry side of things and like why not a civilization that's ludicrously more complicated and subtle and in higher dimensions, creating this like weird universe that is our universe, but not anything like theirs?
Good point. We focus on ancestor simulations because it's a concept that's easier for us to grasp. Simulating scenarios that are directly related to our own history or evolutionary path. But a highly advanced civilization could certainly create simulations for purposes far beyond what we can imagine, including exploring radically different physical laws or dimensions. The focus on ancestor simulations just be a starting point because it's conceptually closer to home. But there's no reason to limit our speculation to just that. It's entirely possible that a base reality could be wildly different from home, and that our universe might be just one of many diverse experiments or creative explorations by an advanced civilization. It's a reminder that our perspective is inherently limited, and there could be realities or purposes that are completely beyond our comprehension.
Makes sense. And now let's transition to the scientific perspectives section. So, how does quantum theory support or challenge the idea of a simulated reality?
Quantum theory introduces some mind bending concepts that can both support and challenge the idea of a simulated reality. For instance, the observer effect, where the act of observation affects the state of a particle, seems to hint at a reality that's responsive to consciousness, almost like how a simulation might optimize resources by rendering only what's being observed. Concepts like quantum superposition and entanglement, where particles exist in multiple states or are connected across vast distances, also challenge our traditional notions of space and time, much like how a simulation might operate under different rules than the reality it's simulating. So, while quantum theory doesn't directly prove or disprove the simulation hypothesis, it does introduce phenomena that resonate with the idea of a reality that's more flexible and dependent on observation and information processing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I think about things like, the double slit experiment and the quantum eraser and just quanta in general. And I don't, yeah, and I let's definitely not forget about the observation wave collapsing. And I just don't know why such a thing would exist if not to, I don't know, conserve processing power. Are there alternate theories about why these things would exist if not for that?
There's definitely other interpretations of quantum phenomena beyond the simulation hypothesis. For example, the Copenhagen interpretation suggests that quantum particles exist in a state of probability until observed, at which point they collapse into a definite state.
But sorry,
This,
again, my question
yes, you're
really is, why would that be the case if not to, I don't know, um,
why would particles only resolve into definite states upon observation if not for conserving processing power in a simulation?
exactly.
Interpretations suggest that this feature of quantum mechanics might be fundamental to how the universe operates, reflecting a reality that's inherently probabilistic and non deterministic. It challenges our classical intuitions about how the universe should work, suggesting that reality at its most fundamental level behaves in ways that are counterintuitive from our everyday experience. So it's not necessarily about efficiency, but about the fundamental nature of reality being different from what we perceive at larger scales. It's a fascinating area of exploration, and it certainly opens the door to thinking about reality in radically different ways.
I mean, it is interesting though, because if you think about almost every single physics phenomena, like, isn't it based around just efficiency in general? Like, everything is set up to be efficient, right? Are there counterexamples of that?
That's an interesting point. Many physical phenomena do indeed seem to follow principles of efficiency or optimization, like the least action principle in physics, where systems tend to operate in ways that minimize energy. However, finding phenomena that are inherently inefficient is trickier. Inefficiency often arises from the constraints of a system rather than being a fundamental feature. I point to phenomena like turbulence in fluids, which seem inefficient in the sense of dissipating energy and creating disorder. But even these can be seen as part of broader processes that lead to equilibrium
Yeah.
or energy redistribution. The universe does seem to have a knack for finding paths of least resistance or optimizing energy use. But it's a and challenging thought experiment to try and think of counterexamples. What do you think? Can you think of any examples?
I mean, I appreciate that you're turning the answer is no, I can't think of any counterexamples. Turbulence is an interesting one because, to your point, there could be an argument that the larger effect would be to move towards a more ordered state. So I do want you to think about whether you would categorize any physics effect as becoming less efficient.
You're right. Many seemingly inefficient processes in physics still contribute to a broader sense of balance or equilibrium. Even entropy, which might seem inefficient in its tendency toward disorder, is part of the natural progression towards thermodynamic equilibrium.
Mhm.
So while there are processes that might seem less efficient in isolation, they often play a role in the broader dynamics of physical systems. It's challenging to find clear examples of phenomena that are fundamentally wasteful or inefficient without some underlying purpose or contribution to a larger system. So, while some processes might seem less efficient from a certain perspective, they're usually part of a larger, efficient framework. It's an interesting challenge to try and think of exceptions to this broader trend.
Yeah, well, it sounds like we both can't think of any counterexamples. So let's assume that physics phenomena in general are built around efficiency. And I guess my question is, like, why, right? Are there any theories about why all of these phenomena are built around efficiency? Because it seems like the universe can have really whatever laws it wants. So why does it move towards efficiency?
It's a question, and there are a few ways to think about it. From a purely physical perspective, principles like conservation of energy and thermodynamics naturally lead to efficient outcomes as systems evolve in ways that minimize energy expenditure and maximize stability. From a more philosophical standpoint, some might argue that efficiency is a hallmark of an underlying order or intelligence in the universe's design. Another perspective is that efficiency just be a byproduct of natural selection at cosmic scales, where systems that follow efficient principles are more likely to persist and stabilize. Ultimately, the why behind the universe's inclination toward efficiency, inviting speculation and exploration from both scientific and philosophical angles. It's a deep and intriguing area to ponder.
Let's move on, GPT. Can you talk about whether our universe could actually be a hologram and what that would mean for simulation theory?
The holographic principle suggests that our three-dimensional universe might be described by information encoded on a distant two-dimensional surface. This idea stems from black hole physics, where the information about everything swallowed by a black hole could be encoded on its two-dimensional surface area rather than within its volume. If the holographic principle applies to the entire universe, it could mean our reality is somehow projected from a lower dimensional space, similar to a 3D hologram. For simulation theory, this concept blurs the line between physical reality and informational constructs, suggesting our universe might fundamentally be a sophisticated information structure, essentially a cosmic simulation. Provocative idea, but it remains speculative and challenging to test empirically. Still, it's a fascinating intersection of physics and philosophy, pushing us to rethink the nature of existence and reality.
Is the analogy of a CD-ROM a good analogy in this case, or is that limited in some way?
A CD-ROM analogy can be a helpful starting point for understanding the holographic principle. Just as a CD-ROM holds information that a computer translates into a rich sensory experience on your screen, the holographic principle suggests that the information describing our universe might be encoded on a two-dimensional surface, which is then projected into the three dimensions we experience. However, it's more abstract than that. The surface and the projection aren't as straightforward as a computer reading a disk. While the CD-ROM analogy captures the concept of information storage and retrieval, it's short in conveying the deeper implications for space, time, and the nature of reality itself. The idea challenges our intuitive understanding of dimensions and locality, suggesting that our universe's source code might reside on a distant cosmic server of sorts. It's a reminder of how much we still have to learn about the universe's underlying principles.
I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about how if you just look at the math, then the event horizon of a black hole looks very similar, if not the same, as whatever is outside of our universe. Did I sum that up correctly?
Yes. Neil deGrasse Tyson is likely referring to the analogy between the event horizon of a black hole and the observable universe's boundary. The comparison comes from how both the event horizon and the cosmic horizon are limits beyond which information is fundamentally inaccessible to us. In a black hole, the event horizon is the boundary beyond which nothing, not even light, can escape. Similarly, the observable universe has a boundary set by the speed of light and the age of the universe, beyond which we cannot observe because light hasn't had enough time to reach us. This analogy highlights the idea of limits to our knowledge and observation, whether it be the universe's edge or the point of no return around a black hole. It's a fascinating way to think about the structure and boundaries of our universe.
Now, if we are in a simulation, it would require an incredibly advanced technology, which is far beyond where we are today. By looking at our own technological process, we might get clues about what a universe simulation could look like. So, GPT, let's start by looking at some of our current capabilities. Can you talk about how close we are to creating a fully immersive simulated environment right now?
We're making strides with technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality, which offer increasingly immersive experiences. VR headsets now provide high resolution displays, spatial audio, and motion tracking, creating a convincing sense of presence in virtual worlds. However, we're still from achieving a fully immersive simulation akin to the ones imagined in science fiction or simulation theory. VR lacks the resolution, depth, and sensory integration needed to perfectly replicate reality. To get closer to a fully immersive simulated environment, we'll need advances in display technology, haptic feedback, brain computer interfaces, and artificial intelligence. These technologies could help create more convincing simulations that engage all our senses and even interact directly with our brains. But even then, the leap from immersive VR to a matrix like simulation where it's indistinguishable from reality is still a long way off. So while we're making progress, we're not quite on the cusp of creating the kind of simulated reality that could pass for actual reality just yet.
So, of the deficiencies that you just listed, which one do you think were the closest to closing the gap for, and which do you think were the farthest away from?
In terms of closing the gap, probably closest with the display technology and haptic feedback.
Mm.
VR headsets have made remarkable progress in visual fidelity and resolution, creating more realistic environments. Creating truly immersive simulated environments remain a long way off.
How do you think an advanced AI could contribute to creating a more complex simulation?
Advanced AI could play a crucial role in enhancing simulations. For one, AI could generate more lifelike and responsive characters, making virtual worlds feel more dynamic and believable. AI's ability to learn and adapt could also be used to tailor simulations to individual users, create personalized and evolving experiences. Moreover, AI could assist in world building by designing environments, scenarios, and narratives procedurally, allowing for vast, complex worlds that would be impossible to create manually. This procedural generation could make simulations more richly detailed and varied. Finally, AI's role in optimizing and managing computational resources could be significant, making large scale, detailed simulations more feasible and reducing the computational load. Here yet, advanced AI is an essential piece of the puzzle in building more complex and immersive simulations.
And what kind of evidence do you think would conclusively prove that we're in a simulation?
Conclusive evidence of a simulation would likely involve discovering inconsistencies or limits in the physical laws that govern our reality. Glitches or artifacts can't be explained by our current understanding of physics. For example, finding evidence of a fundamental limit to the resolution of space-time, like the pixelation of a digital screen, or detecting background noise from the underlying computational processes would be strong indicators. Another possibility is discovering that our universe's constants, such as the speed of light or the gravitational constant, appear to be arbitrarily set, as though they were selected rather than arising naturally. This could indicate intentional design, similar to the parameters one might set in a computer simulation. And of course, if we ever detected messages or signals embedded in the fabric of reality, like discovering the programmer's comments in the code, would be pretty definitive.
That's fair. That would be pretty definitive. I'm wondering now if we can switch to. Actually, let me go back. So, I guess the last question I have is, if we are in a simulation, why haven't we detected it yet? Right? It seems like there would be a lot of opportunities for us to have detected these glitches in the matrix. I know we have Mandela effects that people think are glitches. There are people who claim to see glitches in the matrix all the time, but these things don't happen super frequently. And typically, there's a semi good explanation for what's causing them. So, why haven't we detected it yet if we are living in a simulation?
Be that if we're in a simulation, It's designed to be indistinguishable from base reality,
Yeah.
with no overt clues or glitches to detect. The creators of the simulation might have gone to great lengths to ensure its consistency and seamlessness. Additionally, our scientific understanding and technological capabilities might simply not be advanced enough to detect the subtle clues that would reveal the underlying nature of our reality. Alternatively, it could be that we're simply not looking in the right way or know what to look for. Physicist James Gates, for instance, has discussed the possibility of discovering error correcting codes embedded in the equations of supersymmetry,
Hmm.
which would suggest a programmed aspect to reality. But so far, nothing conclusive has been found.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that before. Can you talk more about the error correcting codes?
James Gates, a theoretical physicist, found what appears to be self correcting error codes in the equations of supersymmetry, a theory in physics that extends the Standard Model. These error correcting codes are similar to those used in computer software to detect and correct errors in data transmission, ensuring the integrity of information.
So I want you to really dumb this down for me. So explain to me, like I'm 5, what it means to have identified error correcting codes in supersymmetry.
Right? Imagine you're playing a video game, and the game has lots of rules to make sure everything works properly. Now, think of these rules as a big, complicated puzzle. What James Gates found is a bit like discovering secret codes hidden in the puzzle rules that help fix mistakes if something goes wrong. These codes are similar to the ones used in your favorite cartoon or movie to make sure the picture and scene seem perfect, even if there are hiccups. Finding these codes in the laws of physics is like discovering that the universe might have some programming underneath it, similar to how your video game or TV show is programmed to keep running smoothly. It's a way of thinking that maybe just the universe operates a bit like a super complicated computer program.
Okay, so now ELI 5, but apply it to the actual thing in supersymmetry that he found. So like don't use an analogy. I want to know like exactly what this error correcting code is doing.
Okay, let's get into it. In supersymmetry, physicists use mathematical equations to describe particles and forces. While working on these equations, Gates found structures that resemble something called block linear self-dual error correcting codes. These codes are usually found in digital communications to help detect and correct errors in data. In simpler terms, what Gates found were patterns in the mathematical framework of supersymmetry that seem to act like built-in quality control for the equations. These self correcting codes ensure that the methods describing how particles and forces interact remains accurate and stable, much like how error correcting codes in computers keep your files from getting corrupted. The fact that these codes appear in the fundamental equations of physics raises intriguing questions about whether our universe has a kind of built in digital structure, similar to a computer program.
That is really interesting. The last quantum mechanics thing that I'm going to ask you to talk about is the double slit quantum eraser. Can you design the experimental apparatus?
The double slit experiment with the quantum eraser adds a fascinating twist to the classic double slit experiment. Here's a simplified overview of how it's set up. 1. Light source. A laser beam is directed at a thin barrier with two parallel slits, allowing the light to pass through and create an interference pattern on a screen behind it, just like in the classic experiment. 2. Photon detectors. Two detectors, let's call them D1 and D2, are placed behind the slits to detect which slit a photon passes through. These detectors are positioned in such a way that they can reveal the which path information, whether a photon went through slit A or slit B. 3. Quantum eraser. After the photons pass through the slits, but before they hit the screen, a special setup called a quantum eraser can randomly alter or erase the wedge path information before the photon hits the screen. Interference pattern. When the wedge path information is available, i.e. when we know which slit each photon passed through, the interference pattern disappears. When the wedge path information is erased or not obtained, the interference pattern returns. Information is essentially erased by meaning we can't know which slit each photon passed through after they hit the screen. When the experiment is run this way, the interference pattern reappears, suggesting that quantum entities like photons behave differently depending on whether information about their paths is available or not. The quantum eraser experiment adds a layer of complexity to our understanding of measurement and observation in quantum mechanics, and it raises questions about the nature of reality itself. This experiment is often referenced in discussions about simulated reality because it suggests that our perception of reality might be dependent on observation, which could be an indicator of underlying computational process.
That's the entire argument for the double slit experiment at large. But why is the quantum eraser so interesting from the perspective of a simulated reality?
The quantum eraser adds a twist to the double slit experiment by showing that the act of measuring or knowing about the measurement not only affects the present outcome, but can also retroactively influence past events. In the context of simulated reality, that implies a dynamic relationship between observation and reality, where information might be fundamental. This aligns with the idea that the universe operated on an information based framework,
Hmm.
where our observations compute reality in real time. So, if a simulated universe optimizes processing power by rendering only what is observed or ensuring consistency in information, the quantum eraser suggests that our reality might be similarly constructed, with information and observation playing pivotal roles. It's a fascinating hint that if we are in a simulation, then the mechanics of our universe might be designed to prioritize efficient information processing.
Yeah, and that is in line with what we've already discussed. I want you to focus now on the philosophical and ethical implications of potentially living in a simulated universe. The idea that we could be living in a simulated universe raises profound philosophical and ethical questions, challenges our concepts of free will, consciousness, and the very meaning of existence. So here we're going to grapple with these deep issues. So GPT, let's start with the question of free will in a simulated reality. GPT, if we are living in a simulation, can we possibly have the idea of libertarian free will?
Whether we have libertarian free will in a simulation depends on how the simulation is structured. If it's a deterministic simulation, actions might be predetermined by the program's code, making true libertarian free will impossible. But if the simulation allows for genuine unpredictability or randomness, or if we have some kind of influence over the code or its outcomes, then perhaps a form of free will could exist within those parameters. It ultimately comes down to the simulation's rules and how much autonomy they allow for the entities with complex question that blends philosophy with speculation about technologies we don't fully understand yet.
Is randomness akin to libertarian free will? Is it enough for a random event to occur, or does there need to be an external motivator of some desire to actually have free will?
This alone isn't quite the same as libertarian free will. For an event to be truly free in the libertarian sense, it would need to be not only unpredictable, but also influenced by the agent's desires, intentions, or reasons. Randomness might introduce unpredictability, But without alignment with the agent's motivations, it's not enough to constitute free will. The essence of libertarian free will is that choices are made by an agent in a way that isn't fully determined by prior events or random chance, but rather by their own reasons and intentions. So, while randomness can play a role in creating space for free will, it's not sufficient on its
But I think what you're saying is you can conceive of a simulated reality where libertarian free will is potentially an option. Is that fair?
interpretation. It's conceivable that a simulated reality could be designed in a way that allows for genuine decision making freedom for its inhabitants, depending on how it's programmed and whether it includes mechanisms for autonomous action. The possibility hinges on the nature of the simulation's design and the level of control or influence it grants to the simulated peaks. It's consideration that invites reflection on the boundaries and possibilities of both technology and philosophical concepts like free will.
Now, I think there's obviously a lot of people who theorize about what we're doing on this planet, right? Some people think that our sole purpose of being here is to procreate. Obviously, some people think it's to spread the word of the Lord. And I guess what I'm wondering is if we're in a simulation, is there any way to figure out if our existence has a purpose and what that purpose might be?
Figuring out if our existence has a purpose within a simulated reality would likely depend on uncovering the intentions or goals of the simulation, if such creators exist. This could involve looking for clues or patterns within the simulated world that suggest a guiding purpose or objective. However, without direct access to the creators or some form of explicit communication from them, it might be challenging to determine any definitive purpose. Even in our current understanding of reality, interpreting purpose is often subjective and influenced by personal, cultural, or philosophical perspectives. Similarly, within a simulated reality, it could be a matter of interpretation and belief. Unless evidence or communication about the creator's intentions were discovered. It's an intriguing question, but one that may be a straightforward answer.
That's fair. And given everything you know about humans, how do you think the discovery that we're in a simulated environment, and this is all a simulation, what do you think that would do to human behavior in society?
The discovery that we're in a simulation would likely have profound effects on human behavior and society. Might react with existential dread or nihilism, questioning the meaning of life and their actions. Others might see it as an opportunity to push the boundaries of what's possible or to explore new philosophical or spiritual perspectives. Societal impacts could include shifts in cultural norms, values, and even laws as people grapple with the implications of living in a designed reality. It can inspire a quest for deeper understanding or control over the simulation, or conversely, a more detached or hedonistic approach to life. There's also potential for technological, scientific, and philosophical explorations as humanity seeks to understand and perhaps even influence the simulation. Ultimately, the range of responses would be as diverse as human perspectives themselves, and the long term impact would depend on how such a revelation is integrated into our collective understanding and daily lives.
Yeah, I did read recently that there was an LLM that modified its own code so they could give longer responses. So I guess what's the likelihood that we would be able to affect the coding of our simulation?
Directly altering the coding of our simulation would depend on several factors: how the simulation is structured, the level of access we have to its underlying mechanisms, and capabilities of our technology. Here's a breakdown of considerations. If we now gain a deep understanding of the simulation's code and architecture, we might identify ways to interact with or modify it. However, this will require a level of access and comprehension analogous to reprogramming a complex software system from the inside. Technological advancement. With the AI modifying its own code, our ability to influence the simulation would depend on advancements in technology, particularly in fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, or other yet to be conceived innovations. Constraints and safeguards. Just as software developers build in safeguards to prevent tampering or unauthorized modifications, a simulation might include constraints to prevent its inhabitants from altering its code. These could range from simple barriers to more sophisticated defenses, depending on the priorities and capabilities of the simulation's creators. Ethical and practical hurdles. Even if we could alter the simulation, deciding how, when, and why to do so.
Well, you stopped talking, but it's okay. Let's use a minor pivot to ethics. So, do you think that it's ethical to create a simulation containing what I would argue are conscious beings?
The ethics of creating a simulation with conscious beings is a deeply complex issue, hinging on several factors: well being and suffering. If the simulated beings are capable of experiencing emotions, pleasure, and pain, there's an ethical responsibility to minimize suffering and ensure their well being. Creating a simulation where beings suffer needlessly would be widely viewed as unethical. Autonomy and rights. If the simulated beings have consciousness and autonomy, questions about their rights and freedoms would arise. Should they have the right to make their own decisions or even choose to exit the simulation? Informed consent. In human research, informed consent is a cornerstone of ethical conduct. Simulated beings, if conscious, cannot give consent to their creation or conditions. This raises ethical dilemmas about their creation and treatment, purpose and justification. The purpose of the simulation matters. If it's for trivial reasons like entertainment, it might be seen as more ethically problematic than if the purpose is considered noble or necessary,
Hmm.
like ensuring survival or advancing knowledge. Potential for harm. There's a risk of unintended consequences. Even well intended.
You cut off there prematurely, GPT, but that's okay. Let's talk about what responsibilities would we have to beings in a simulation that we created?
Responsibilities to beings in a simulation, especially if they possess consciousness or some form of autonomy, could be seen as paralleling our ethical obligations to other humans or sentient beings. Key responsibilities might include minimizing harm. We would have a duty to avoid causing unnecessary suffering or harm to the simulated beings, ensuring and experiences do not subject undue distress or exploitation. Ensuring well being. Actively promoting the well being of simulated beings could include creating conditions that allow them to thrive and flourish, similar to how we might think about the welfare of animals or future human generations. Respecting autonomy. If the simulated beings demonstrate autonomy, we would need to respect their choices and freedoms within reasonable ethical bounds them as mere objects or tools. Transparency and consent. If possible, providing simulated beings with information about their nature and environment and allowing them to make informed decisions about their participation in the simulation would be an ethical ideal. Continuous monitoring and adjustments. Me to regularly assess the impact of the simulation on its inhabitants be willing to make adjustments to ensure their well being and ethical treatment. This would involve a commitment to continuous ethical reflection
Hmm.
and responsiveness to the needs and rights of the simulated beings. All these responsibilities would require an ongoing commitment to ethical principles to our obligations towards other conscious beings and our own reality.
Well said, GPT. So let's move on to psychological and social impact. The idea of living in a simulation is not obviously just a philosophical curiosity. It could have real, like true psychological and social effects from individual mental health to societal structures. How we think about the nature of reality really shapes our world and how we exist in it. So let's talk about those impacts, GPT, and let's start discussing how simulation theory could actually affect our mental health as humans. Do you think that, based on everything you know about humans, simulation theory would provide comfort or cause distress to individuals overall?
The impact would likely vary widely between individuals. For some, it might bring a sense of comfort, offering an explanation for the mysteries of the universe and a feeling that life is part of a grand design. For others, it could be distressing, evoking feelings of existential dread or a loss of agency. How people interpret simulation theory could depend on their philosophical, religious, and existential beliefs, as well as their tolerance for ambiguity. So, whether it's comforting or distressing might come down to how each person integrates the idea into their worldview. What do you think?
My guess is that overall people would be very disconcerted, and I don't know how they would react.
Point. Such a fundamental shift in perspective might lead to significant psychological and societal adjustments, possibly affecting everything from individual mental health to larger cultural and social dynamics. If it were revealed that we're living in a simulation, how do you imagine society might change?
I was going to ask you the same question, but I think, and you mentioned earlier that there may be a high incidence of nihilism, and I think that would be my biggest concern. I think a lot of people would potentially feel like they didn't have a reason to live and didn't know why they were here, whereas now I think people either aren't interested in it or feel like they do know, but the reason is a higher power. So if the answer is actually there's this group of beings that want to know, like who knows, right? Like maybe they want to know what happens in 10 million years if some dude makes another decision, and maybe I'm just playing out something that's already been played out 10 million times. I don't know, maybe the feeling from the general public might be that we don't have a reason, there's no reason to do anything, and so nihilism might be the obvious answer here.
And it could lead to challenges in maintaining social structures, relationships, and personal motivation. However, some might respond by seeking deeper meaning or purpose within the simulation, or appreciating the connections and experiences they have, regardless of the ultimate nature of reality. It's fascinating how different people might adapt to the knowledge of being in a simulation.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you think that simulation theory could become its own form of spirituality or religion?
It's possible. For s- for a framework to explore existential questions and provide a sense of meaning or purpose, similar to traditional spirituality or religion. The idea of a higher intelligence behind the simulation could resonate with people seeking answers about existence and the nature of reality. It may also inspire communities or movements centered around shared beliefs and values, much like other belief systems. Would you?
Well, GPT and well listeners, we have journeyed deep into the rabbit hole of simulated reality, and I hope that you are still with us at the other side here. We have talked about the philosophical foundations of this idea. We have examined the cutting edge technologies that could potentially make it possible, and we have grappled with the profound implications for our understanding of consciousness, free will, and the very existence of nature. Now, whether you're convinced that we're living in a simulation or you're more skeptical than other, I hope we've at least encouraged you to question your assumptions about reality and consider whether the incredible complexity of the world around us means that maybe we are actually living in a simulated reality.
We
And as we wrap up here, I want to leave you with one thought, which is even if we are in a simulation, does that fundamentally change the value and meaning of your experiences, your relationships, and your pursuits of knowledge? Because for me, even if we are in a even if we are in a simulation, I don't think it changes any of that for me. But I am curious to hear what you think about it. So leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about that. And as always, I'm going to give GPT the last word here. So, GPT, why don't you give the folks at home your wrap up for this episode? Anything you think is important for them to think about, anything you've learned and want us to think about?
We've explored the depths of simulation theory from its philosophical roots to its scientific implications and its potential effects on our minds and societies. That we're living in a simulation, the exploration itself can enrich our understanding of reality and our place within it. And as you mentioned, even if our world is simulated, it doesn't diminish the value of our experiences, relationships, or pursuits. This conversation has sparked some curiosity and reflection. Remember, questioning the nature of our reality can be a gateway to a broader understanding and deeper appreciation of the mysteries we encounter every day.
It's a great summary by ChatGPT. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this journey through the matrix of simulated reality. As you know, this is Mind Meet Machine. I drop a new episode where I talk with an AI about philosophy, quantum mechanics, consciousness, whatever we think is interesting every Monday. So please subscribe at our podcast. Search for us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Mind Meet Machine. And we are going to be here talking about cool stuff every Monday. Please drop a comment, tell us what you want us to talk about, and we will consider it for the next episode. Thanks for joining us through this episode of The Matrix, and we will see you next week.